I was looking at another story recorded by Luke in Acts chapter 12. James, he got killed and Peter was imprisoned. This was a time, there was back around 44 or AD, I think. There has been a famine, in the land. The spread of the gospel to the Gentiles had given, a new direction to the early church. Jewish believers, gave support and encouraged this, but this new cause, but they were also careful, to follow the laws and the customs of the Jews. The Jewish rulers, they had to be aware of the things that were going on outside Jerusalem. The Romans, they were still governing Judea, but the emperor had added Judea area to a new, a king, King Herod Agrippa I. This was not Herod, the great, the Herod of Jesus' time. This was his grandson. And he was really friends with a lot of the Romans. I think he was friends with Emperor Gaius and a lot of these Jewish leaders, that were in the Sanhedrin and all that, But I just, he knew that the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees and the Pharisees didn't like the apostles and the new church. And, these Jewish leaders, they were threatened by the new church, really. But I'm going to read Acts 12, 1 through 4. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. So Herod, he decided to arrest some of the church. He captured James, and this was John's brother, son of Zebedee. And then later he, apprehended Peter. Luke does not mention it, but apparently there was no trial. I mean, Herod simply had James killed with a sword. Fortunately, I think he may have been beheaded. Peter was later caught and put in prison. But Peter had been arrested during the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which that led into Passover feast. So Herod decided, to wait until this was over to bring out Peter. I'm going to read Acts 12, 5 through 10. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains. And the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly, and his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garment unto thee, and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. But they were past the first and the second ward. They came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. And they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. Well, the first thing I was going to say was, when Peter was in prison, the church was in prayer without ceasing. This is the kind of action that moves God. Herod had put Peter under heavy guard. There were 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Peter had to sleep between 2 guards, bound with 2 chains. The night before Herod would have brought Peter out, Peter was sleeping between the 2 guards, and all the other guards. But, if I was going to be executed the next day, I don't think I would be sleeping, But, he had Christ with him, and to be able to sleep, peacefully like that. But, the angel of the Lord came, and there was a light that shined in the prison. The angel woke Peter, by hitting him on the side. And as the angel raised him up, the chains fell off of Peter's hands. And the angel told him to get dressed and follow him, but Peter was not sure, if this was really happening or if it was a vision, he was having. But as Peter and the angel, passed the first and second ward and passed the iron gate, he began to see that it was true, After they were, went down the street, the angel departed. I'm going to read Acts 12:11 through 15 now. And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord has sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then they said, It is his angel. I think after the angel left Peter, he kind of came around. He was alone, and he realized, that the Lord had sent an angel to rescue him. But, Peter also realized, what Herod would do to him if he were caught. Peter considered things and went to the house where all the praying was going on. The house of Mary, mother of John Mark. And they were still praying for Peter. They didn't know really if he was still alive or, not. But I think it was really, a large, wealthy home. When Peter knocked, that slave girl Rhoda answered the door. But instead of letting Peter in, she realized it was him and ran in to tell the others. And they didn't believe her, but Rhoda kept affirming that it really was him. So now I'm going to read verses 16 through 19. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers, what was become of Peter. And when Herod had sought for him, and found him not, he examined the keepers, and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and there abode. So, Peter, he continued to knock until they opened the door, and then once the prayer group saw him, they couldn't believe it. But, Peter quieted the group and told them, how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And he asked them to let James know. And this was James, the brother of Jesus, and he wanted James and the other believers to know. But Peter knew that, by dawn, Herod's men would be searching for him. So he left, and he didn't tell anyone where he was going. So they honestly didn't know where he was. But, Herod's soldiers could not find Peter, and, Herod brought the guards in, questioned them, and then, executed them. But, Herod was mad, and probably out of anger, Herod left Judea and went to the coast to Caesarea and lived there. Okay, I'm going to read 20 through 23. And Herod was highly displeased with them of Tyre and Sidon, but they came with one accord of him, and having made Blastus the king's chamberlain their friend, desired peace, because their country was nourished by the king's country. And upon a set day Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat upon his throne and made an oration unto them. And the people gave a shout, saying, It is the voice of a God, and not of a man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory. And he was eaten of worms, and gave up the ghost. These two cities in Phoenicia, Tyre and I think it's Sidon, they were, important cities, but they were in a place between the mountains and the sea, and it was hard for them to really grow crops and stuff. So they were kind of dependent on the other countries to get food. And Herod was mad at them. These were cities that were near the coast. But the leaders of these cities got together and friended one of Herod's advisors and came to Herod and, were brought peace. But Tyre and Sidon were in a place, that really depended on, Herod's country for food, but on that certain day, Herod, he gave that speech, and I don't know, they said he wore this shiny robe that was glittering in the sun, and he was really real prideful and speaking highly of himself, and the people shouted, saying it was, really true. They said he had the voice of a God, not a man. But I think these people were probably, trying to flatter him because they really needed, to have him on their side. But Herod made no objection, and he gave God no glory. So suddenly the angel of the Lord struck Herod down. It says he was eaten by worms, Josephus, the historian, he was saying that Herod lingered about 5 days with agonizing pain in his belly. And that was before, and then he died. That was a bad way to go, but, all that pride and everything he had, and didn't give God any glory, Okay, now I'm going to read verses 24 and 25. But the word of God grew and multiplied, and Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry, and took with them John, whose surname was Mark. Despite all the things that had happened, the growth of the church continued. Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem, and they delivered some famine relief. And there may have been some time. This may have happened, a little bit later. Again, that historian Josephus had said that the famine was over in, I think, 46 A.D., and Herod had died in 44 A.D., but, we do know Barnabas and Saul fulfilled their ministry and delivered the famine relief. And, they took John Mark with them, to Antioch. I think John Mark was Barnabas's nephew. But, we see this contrast of, Herod's death, the way he went down, and the growth of the church, In verse 24, Luke really made that point. We're not sure why God let James be killed and rescued Peter, but, we can say that in, his divine wisdom, he knew that James' work was done, and Peter was still needed. But I kind of like the fact that, Herod was judged, for his pride, He gave God no glory, after that speech. And then Luke makes the point that the Word of God continued to grow and spread. Let's remember how that early church, got in there and prayed, without ceasing. That kind of thing that really moves God, it's something that we need to look at today. Okay, guys, that about does it this time. Until next time.